Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. See your faces coming in. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, humans. And as always, I have invited some more than human folks. You'll have to listen quite carefully today for the video. This one's a little, or for the audio, this one's a little soft. But then I'll play you one a little louder. Let's see if anyone can guess who this is. Not much to go on, is there? Not much to go on there. Perhaps leaves rustling a little bit, footprints, footfalls, perhaps four-leggeds we might hear there. Let me give you a second one and let's see if you can tell who has now arrived. Welcome, bears. Not the ones from Chicago, New York ones. Welcome, bears. The bears. And yet most of the time they don't sound like that. Most of the time they sound like the footfalls that I gave you. Isn't that something interesting to consider as we start right now? What sounds do we recognize animals by? So good afternoon. Welcome to the Compassion Consortium. I'm Reverend Sarah Bowen, and I'm joined today by my co-founders, Victoria Moran and Reverend William Melton. And as always, Phil is navigating us through the Zoomosphere, and later we'll be adding our service onto YouTube. Elaine is here as well for our Compassion in Action segment with Fred Beasley. To ensure we don't have unwanted, disruptive guests or any of that kind of stuff going on around here during the service, and so you can focus, we've turned off some of the Zoom sharing functions, actually most of the Zoom sharing functions. We meet for Sunday service on the fourth Sunday of every month here. If you're new to us, welcome. We are an interfaith, interspiritual, and interspecies community, and I'll unpack that for you if you're new. Interfaith means we welcome people of any spiritual or religious tradition or system of meaning making or philosophy or whatever you would like to call that which gives you purpose and meaning. And we feature a diverse range of them within our programming. Today, we're joined by Martin Rowe. Interspiritual means we believe that underneath all of that, all of those different paths, there lies a commitment to three common values: peace, compassionate service, and love for the earth community. I hope some of you have that memorized by now. Peace, compassionate service, and love for the entire earth community. Finally, we're interspecies, which means we consider the needs of the others than humans that we share the planet with, and that's why I invited bears in as well today. At the beginning of each of our services, I offer an acknowledgement drawing our awareness to beings who are indigenous to a habitat that I happen to be in. Today, I'd like to presence the Lenape, the Mohican, and the Mohawks of the Hudson Valley, where I am today. And I'd like to also acknowledge a new neighbor in my yard, Ursus americanus. That's who you heard enter today, Ursus americanus. And I'd like to talk about some of the quandaries of living with bear. I suspected the presence of a bear a little earlier this week when my husband was kvetching about the metal pole that he keeps in our front yard that's usually upright with a bird feeder on it, and it had been ripped out of the ground. And what ensued next was typical of many marriages, maybe your marriage, maybe not. I announced, we have a bear visitor. My husband said, no, we don't. We don't have bear. We don't have bear here. And I said, I told you to bring the bird feeder in at night, and you are basically just leaving out temptations for night animals. And on that note, be sure to close the catio at sundown when I am gone next week so the cats do not become bear snacks. I lectured. I can do that every once in a while. My husband countered, but I like to see the flock in the morning when I'm making my coffee. We call them the flock. We have a lot of birds. We call them the flock. And I said, well, put the bird feeder out when you wake up. And I might have said it slightly snarkily. And on we went back and forth, trying to navigate an interspecies issue. I was very, very excited about the bear. My husband, not so much, because he had just spent a lot of money putting that pole back in the ground. Now, I recognize many of you astute wildlife experts would probably love to give me some opinions right now and tell me that we shouldn't leave birdseed out at night, or we shouldn't have birdseed out in the summer, or perhaps we shouldn't be feeding birds at all. And I won't disagree with you. I'm just going to offer in our defense that we sure love those birds, and we're not perfect liberation activists. Well, the next day I got home, and Sean had cemented the pole right in the ground. This was going to be a battle of wills now. And I thought, well, we'll see how this goes. And then that night, I was walking from where I am right now, which is our garage, which is converted into an art studio and a writing room and all sorts of things like that. I was walking across the boardwalk into our home. I put my hand on the doorknob and I heard a very, very loud scuttle that startled me so much. I ran into the house and I slammed the door shut. I looked through the living room window and I announced to my husband, we have a bear. The bird feeder pole was on the ground again. The bird feeder was on the ground again, but I could not find the bear. Also, some ill-formed concrete, I guess rocks now, were also pulled up out of the ground and on the grass. I ran to make sure the cats were not in the catio. I went back to the living room. It was so dark this week. And I yelled at Sean, I can't see anything. Where's the bear? And then he noticed a shadow in the crux of the walnut tree that is about 6 feet outside our front window. And in there was a bear. Now, I was afraid. I was not afraid of the bear. I was afraid the bear would get stuck and the bear would be shot, because that's where my brain goes. And it goes there with good reason, because on this May 7th, a bear was shot in Minneapolis because that bear roamed through the residential neighborhoods. And last year, closer to me, a mother bear named Bobby on Facebook was killed in Newtown, Connecticut. Her cubs were left alive. Apparently, in many places, it's legal to kill an adult bear, but not the cubs. I don't hunt, so I wasn't quite sure how much trouble my new bear neighbor was in, but I was really worried. So I did not take a photo and I did not post it on social media so no one would know where the bear was. That's just asking for trouble. I was also pretty sure the bear didn't want their photo taken looking like a cat trying to figure out how to get out of the tree. And I'm currently writing a paper on the consent and dissent in animal photography for the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. So I thought I'd better practice what I preach. So what I did do was text Debbie Philp. Does anyone remember Debbie, who was here a few months ago and had us do the eye meditation? She's a wildlife rehabilitator in the Adirondacks. And I said, what do? I've got a bear. So we started to have a chat about it. And as we did that, the bear made its way down the tree out into the yard. And my husband started yelling, stay away from my garden. And I started yelling, be safe, bear. I'm so sorry that our habitat has kept you from food. I hope you find food. I hope you're okay. I hope nobody shoots you. I'm yelling all this across the yard. Our neighbors already know about us, so that's probably okay. But what I did learn was that it is legal to shoot bears in my county. Not as close to my house as this bear was, but that you can harvest. Has anyone heard this word? Harvest one bear per year here, as long as it's not in a group and it's not in a den. You can't use bait, and you can't lure them. And you do have to let the Department of Environmental Conservation know. I am sorry for how some of you may feel right now, me sharing that information, because I know it does not feel good. But it's the facts in the county where I live. So I'll admit that we're specious. We feed birds, squirrels, and chipmunks outside our home. We feed cats inside our home, but I'm ill prepared to feed bears, and I'm woefully undereducated on bears, and I'm not sure I should be feeding bears. I've never seen one so close. I've never seen one outside of those things that are called zoos under human lock and key. But now I'm getting educated. I found the work of Dr. Lynn Rogers, a biology founder of the North American Bear Center. I'm reading his papers. I know a few of you are involved in compassionate conservation. If you have bear tips for me, please send me your bear tips. Thank you for all that you do on behalf of the wild beings. And I know many of you have questions. Jack Harkins sent us a very interesting article, Jack, one of our community here, a little while ago in the New York Times called Pythons, Invasive and Hungry, Are Making Their Way North in Florida. And the article detailed the ways that humans have tried to slow the proliferation of Burmese pythons. Paid contractors, trained volunteers, an annual hunt that has people that come from as far away as Latvia. The article includes words like eradicate. And we might be quick to judge the article and leave the snakes alone. But it's way more complex. Because the article also notes that more snakes means more problems with native species like wading birds, marsh rabbits, and white-tailed deer. This isn't easy. This isn't about what I choose to leave off of my plate. This article is the tip of a proverbial iceberg. Humans make decisions every day about beings we think should flourish and those we think should be removed from environments, using words like pest and invasive. Trillions of wild beings are killed. Trillions. We can't save them all. It's naive. So we need to realize that when we save one, we may put others at risk, and we need to get educated. So here's the tips I have for you as I leave you today and pass you off to everyone else in the service. Check out the journal, Human Dimensions of Wildlife. If you're not reading it, I'm going to give you the link to it. It's one of my favorite on conservation conundrums. Read the new book, Pests, How Humans Create Animal Villains by Bethany, Brookshire. Check out the Pan Works website. It's a fairly new ethics think tank dedicated to the well-being of animals, including a lot of stuff on wildlife from Kristen Stewart, Francisco Santiago Avila, Liv Baker, William Lynn, and a bunch of other really, really smart people on these topics. If you don't listen to conservation podcasts, throw one on your list. I Love All Creatures, hosted by Chris J. Mortensen. Continue to read news articles about these conundrums and try not to judge them till you get all the way through. And finally, I am taking suggestions for how I should refer to my new bear neighbor. The current contenders are as follows: Smokey, Baloo, and Boo Boo. Let me know what you think. What should we call our new neighbor? William, over to you.
Okay, so I'm here, and I think you all know that I had a stroke about a month ago, and so I have aphasia. That's called aphasia. So I have a little bit of trouble with my saying words. So I'm going to do the best I can. In the event, the first thing that we're going to do right now is our Tenets of Agreement. And we do this as the beginning of every one of our Tenets of Agreement. And today, our guest will be Nisia Wolf, who is also one of our brand new members to the Compassion Consortium. And so as I see here, she lives in San Antonio, and she grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, and she began her vegan journey in October 2021, and her interests are public speaking with Toastmasters, animal adoptions, and yoga. She also enjoys reading book clubs and listening to all types of music and seeing live concerts. So Nisia, you're up.
Our tenets of agreement. We acknowledge a divine force at the heart of the universe and in all living beings. We may refer to this force as God, but it is known by many names and appears in different forms or as formless. We recognize the common moral principles inherent within all wisdom traditions. We affirm that compassion, reverence for life, and nonviolence are fundamental to religious faith and moral philosophy, and are to be extended to all sentient beings. We stand by the principles of inclusion, diversity, and equality, and hold these as essential in our human relations. We hold that non-human animals are imbued with the same essence of life and love as our human animals, and there is moral parity between us. We avow that humans do not own the earth, its resources, or its inhabitants, but instead must be involved in their protection and care. We endeavor to eat and live in a kind and sustainable manner, moving away from animal foods and animal-derived clothing, as well as any activities that cause harm to our fellow beings, human or otherwise. We aim to provide spiritual comfort, fellowship, and food for thought to those practicing or exploring a vegan lifestyle. We offer guidance and peer support for all of those seeking a more compassionate and spiritual life. We commit to sharing these principles freely with humility and respect in support of non-human animals and the earth.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nicia, for reading our Tenets of Agreement. And so next is our Song of Compassion. This was recommended by Dr. Jeff Feynman, who's a BA, a VMD, and a CVH. He holds both molecular biology and veterinarian degrees from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Jeff applies nutrition, supplementation, herbal therapy, and homeopathy remedies in his veterinarian practice. So this song that we're going to have for you today is called the Algonquin Water Song, engaging women around the world to celebrate and protect our earth's water and the environment in spirit. It was written by Irene Bawati Jerome and assisted by Kathleen DeShane for Grandfather William Comenda's Circle of All Nations Gathering.
Thank you to the elders. Thank you to Dr. Jeff for bringing this to us. Thank you, William, for the beautiful introduction of this song. If you're watching this on YouTube, we generally remove our songs of compassion to make sure that we're sending people to the direct places where the videos can be so that people can discover people's work. So the link to this beautiful song that was just played, which will be removed from our service replay, will be posted in our notes. So if you would like to use it, and we do that each time. So if you would like to use that for something, for a practice in another group that you're in, or you find this as a daily practice, please feel free to do so. And we're going to continue on that theme of water today with a little Visio Divina. We haven't done Visio Divina in a while. Visio Divina is sight divine, and it comes from the idea in mostly in Greek Orthodoxy. Has anyone ever seen icons like this? I was raised Protestant. I was raised Presbyterian, and we didn't have icons in my church. But when my stepson married a Greek woman, and I went to visit, I all of a sudden discovered churches that were just gorgeously painted in the entire piece with icons. And this is Mary Magdalene. So the practice of Visio Divina is when one looks at an icon, one looks at an image of someone that they find sacred, and they just try to kind of feel the presence of the divine, whether we're calling that the universe, or you're calling that nature, or God, or goddess, or Allah, or whatever terminology you might use, through singing. Now, around here, we often feel that. We feel that feeling that many people feel when they're praying or they're meditating, when we're interacting with other species. And so what I have for you today is about a 5-minute video of a lot of feathered ones and some water. And the request is, the invitation to our interspecies spiritual practice is to watch the video, to watch it with your eyes, attend to your breath kind of slowly, and consider that watching it with great intensity is creating a connection between you, whatever is greater than us or more mysterious than us, or whatever makes us all work, whatever that might be, and the beings that you see on the screen. That's it. So look intently, look divinely. Phil, if you could start the image, and then I'm going to take my camera away so people can focus on them and not me. Thank you all. Welcome to Compassion Consortium. Wow, someone's excited. I think we have a new member. Y'all are now part of Interspecies spiritual practice. Notice for you how you feel, whether 5 minutes felt like an eternity, what it felt like to observe animals.
Sacred send off to any of the fishes. Sorry, dudes.
How much of our lives and how much of our time is spent with animals, and how much is it about animals? That's my question for you today. Spend some time with the wild beings that live around you. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, Reverend Sarah. Thank you, ducks and geese and swans. I've always liked birds that swim. You know, I always kind of like people who do things that you don't expect, and birds swimming is one of those things. So lovely to be here with everyone, and also to be introducing our special spiritual guest, who is Martin Rowe. Martin is the director of the Culture and Animals Foundation. He's also the founder of Lantern Books. If you are a vegan or an animal rights person and you look on your bookshelf, you probably see lots of books from Lantern Books. They've done so many incredible titles over the years, and some of those actually come from Martin Rowe. You can read all about him in his bio, which is listed. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very glad to see everyone. And yes, I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you are. It's always wonderful to talk to you. William and I joke sometimes that we think you're the smartest person that we know, and it's always uplifting in that way of, oh, we are being lifted up to bigger thinking every time we talk to you. So I'm sure it'll be like that today. So I was very interested just in what you wrote back to me when I invited you to do this, because you were basically saying, are you sure you want me? But some of the things that you said in asking that were really fascinating. So you started out by saying that you're interested in religion. I know you have an academic background in religions. You said, I'm steeped in the Anglican tradition, but I am agnostic. And I'd like to hear about both of those things, but first about being steeped. As someone who's kind of here and there and all over the place, I don't really understand steeped. So tell me about it.
Well, thank you for asking those questions. So on my mother's side, at least, we come from a long line of teachers and dissenters, Protestant dissenters, actually going all the way back to the 16th century at the very outset of the Protestant Reformation. But the most recent group of people who've been in my family have been Anglican priests. My great-grandfather was an Anglican priest. His two children were schoolmasters, but they also officiated in Anglican ceremonies. So it wasn't surprising that I was raised in the Anglican faith, and I spent a good 7 or 8 years in the choir at my various schools. So the liturgy is very familiar to me. I did English literature and language at universities, a university in which the King James Bible and the various iterations of that through the language of John Milton and others is profoundly influential upon the English language as a whole and scholarship there. And then I did a religious studies master's degree at NYU. So steeped means that it is part and parcel of my conceptions of ritual activity, as well as the language of faith and the very simplicity or explicitness of the Anglican liturgy is very moving to me. So that is that's the steepedness of it.
So for those of us in the States, difference between Anglicanism and Episcopalianism?
Well, I don't think in any particularly important ways. It's still the Church of England. So, but there are, I think Anglicanism would have to be differentiated in the United States since it's not England. So
Okay.
But it's the same church.
But to experience it, that's where we would go here.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to have a full immersion experience, you should watch both the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II and the coronation of Charles III. If you want the complete high church bells and whistles of high Anglicanism, in which I grew up, that is what you would go to. So you don't have to go to church. You can just go to YouTube and watch it. And that may well be all that you ever need to see or hear ever again. Undiluted Anglicanism.
Well, I'm happy to report that I attended both. So you're agnostic, and lots of people say that, but I don't think other people really know what any individual who says that means. So what does it mean to you?
Well, I have problems with the creed from the very first words. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord, who was, etc., etc. I believe in God are the four most uninteresting aspects, I think, about faith. The eyes relationship, the specificities of belief, and the prepositional form before the ineffable. For me, I find all of those questionable, and in the questions, I find the most interesting and imaginatively compelling dimensions of the believing person. I'm very, very interested in the people who believe. And I have many friends, very many friends over many decades who are practicing religious. They are monks and they are nuns. They live their daily life through the rounds of the expression of faith. And I'm fascinated by what they are called upon to do and how they choose to express their calling. So I'm very interested in people who believe, but I just do not find the words "I believe in God" resonate with me.
And you also implied in your little paragraph to me that you were interested in these powerful elements of what faith requires. So in your view, what does faith require?
Well, in my reading of the various scriptures of faith and the stories of faith, I am struck that all ecumenism aside and the kind of sense of faith as a consolation or faith as a place of comfort and sanctuary and rest, the stories that resonate with me and the people who resonate with me run as far as they possibly can away from faith. So God, when God calls upon the person of faith, or the person who will be the leader of that faith, it is at an inconvenient moment. They feel inadequate to it. It often involves explicit submission. It is all-consuming, and it turns their life upside down. They have physical manifestations of the experience of suffering of faith. They go blind. They can't speak. They run to the ends of the earth to escape the mission that they're sent upon. And they are obligated to do sometimes terrible things. And this is where I become more existential and appreciate the work of Kierkegaard, who was very much about the extraordinary amorality, the supra, beyond the notions of ordinary morality that the person of faith is called upon to be. So for me, it is the tremendum, that experience of the divine, is challenging to all our conceptions of the notion of faith as a place that is peaceful and restful. It is turbulent and destructive. It changes the entire trajectory of your life and makes you a different person. In Saul's case, a very different person, a completely different person. So that for me feels a more, again, I think it's probably because I'm a writer and I'm interested in the imagination. It's more interesting to me to look at that dimension of faith, the all-consuming, turbulent, difficult, highly charged nature of it, than what I consider to be the rather bland ideas of faith that I think institutional religion would probably prefer us to welcome and appreciate.
So what caused you to go for graduate study? And this is interesting to me because I have a bachelor's degree in comparative religions. And I remember when I was in school every now and then thinking, I have the only major that some people don't even believe exists. You could be majoring in history or chemistry, and some people could say, oh, that sounds awful. I wouldn't want to do that. But nobody would say, oh, history, that's nothing. And yet religion and God and all that, we can't measure that in scientific terms. And yet you were drawn to do your graduate study in this field. Why?
Well, it was religious studies, so it was the fact and practice and the doctrinal and philosophical underpinnings of those religions that was being taught. And I just don't think you can understand civilizations without understanding the formulations by which they identify themselves and their relationship with the divine. So religious studies feels formative to me in understanding a whole range of disciplines. So it wasn't a seminary, it wasn't asking us to change our or acquire our faith, but it was very much along those lines. And I knew that if I did a study of philosophy or I would talk only about God. So I decided to do a religious studies degree so I could talk about philosophy.
Love it. And yet you said that none of this interest in people of faith and religions as formative for culture had much bearing on your animal rights and vegan sentiments. That you said those are driven by humanism and moral philosophy. So just as you defined agnosticism, define humanism.
Well, first of all, my earbuds are running out of battery space, so I'm going to return to this. I hope you can still hear me.
Hear you beautifully.
Okay, very good. So, well, I thought when I was thinking about how to respond to this question. So I'm very interested. So this might explain it. So I'm very interested in Leibniz's question that he asked many, many centuries ago. Why is there something rather than nothing? That for me is a very interesting question. His answer was the monad, the necessary monad. All nature is made up of component parts, and the thing that holds all those parts together is the part that has no precursor. So all contingency is based on this fundamental principle, which he called God. And even as I articulate that answer, it feels thuddingly uninteresting to me. It feels over literal. It feels a shortcut. It's a shortcut to dwelling in the question of the absolute improbability to the vanishing point of possibility that that there is a universe, that it exists rather than nothing existing. There was probably plenty of non-existence before existence, and there will be plenty of non-existence after existence. But the fact of existence is so extraordinary that it cannot be contained in a theism or even in an atheism, because the presupposition of an atheism suggests that the meaning there is a God to which you do not subscribe, but agnosticism, which dwells in the lack of knowledge, agnosis, is for me the most appropriate place to be in, because it stops the question from being answered by the failure to imagine that the question could possibly not have an answer. So that, does that help? I don't know. That's I think where I think my philosophical interest exceeds the doctrinal or dogmatic or even the precepts or the philosophical thinking that might, for instance, exist. Now, there are plenty of religious scriptures that have asked questions as a doctrine of faith. So in the book of Job, God asks Job, were you there when I created Leviathan? Which is an unanswerable question. Of course he wasn't there, but he's saying there is a time before time where I was present. You have no idea. You have no concept of being able to think about that. in the Tao Te Ching, the plurality of the universe is so great that there is no number larger than the 10,000 things. And in one of the great Vedic scriptures, there is a hymn to the creation, which ends with a series of questions, in which I think the final thing is, and then there was a time before that, and perhaps maybe there wasn't. and so at the very outset of the structure of some of the great scriptures that have animated human beings, there have been questions when they've come to we have no idea. We have no concept of it. So dwelling in the question is better than the answer.
And yet you seem to have found an answer to certain questions, such as, should we have respect and value for other than human beings? Should we be consuming them, exploiting them? No. So where does that come from?
Well, that came from a recognition that I had absolutely no reason to continue to eat animals. There was no good justification that I could see. It was unnecessary. It was thoughtless. It was quite literally the very least I could do. I was concerned about the environment, but I hadn't really formulated ideas of animal rights. I hadn't formulated ideas of a healthy lifestyle. I hadn't looked at the issues surrounding environmental problems associated specifically with factory farming. I didn't read a book, watch a video. I knew vegetarians, and I thought, I will try it. And as long as I remain healthy, I will continue. And there were various sort of moments that pushed me towards veganism. But it has never been something that I felt it was for me the starting point. It was never the ending point. So
you are now the director of the Culture and Animals Foundation. Where does human culture and animal rights, where do they intersect?
So the Culture and Animals Foundation was founded by Tom and Nancy Reagan back in 1985. Tom, who literally wrote the book on animal rights called The Case for Animal Rights, which is 40 years old this year. And I want to acknowledge, and I know he's there on the call, Zippera and Jim Harris, who I met many years ago back at the International Compassionate Living Festivals in Raleigh, North Carolina, that Tom and Nancy put on in the 90s all the way up until 2007. And it's there I met many scholars and philosophers and artists and creative folks who showed me how animal rights and creativity and philosophy merge together. I mean, I think we all know that animals are profoundly important for the child's imagination. Maybe they are the things that stirred the imagination, and that animals have been foundational in art. They are the images that we see on the caves. So it is for whatever reason we may ascribe, it was hunting patterns, it was whatever totemic animals. It was the animals that caught our eye and our imagination, and it is their presence in our lives that, for me, not only stirs the imagination, but makes me fear that their absence and their continuing absence, and not just the loss of charismatic megafauna, but the loss of the animal, means that the fundamental thing that makes us human, which is the capacity for us to act upon our imagination, will die, and we will cease to be human. So it is intrinsic to the experience of being human that we should create art in order to understand the animal within us, but also the animals without us. So.
And how do you see the role that all these religions that you have studied play? It seems, I think, to most of us here that they have profoundly let down other than human beings. Why, and can we fix it?
Yeah, so that's a very long question, but I think I would talk a little bit about what I think our obligation is as animal advocates. Even though I have published many, many books on the various sutras and doctrinal books and chapters on why fill in the blank religion should care about animals, why the practitioners of that particular religion should care about animals. And most people would go to the various proscriptions about not harming animals and the prescriptions for living a good life, which means being kind to others, etc. Again, I don't think that's the most interesting area. It is the fact that in, say, the Hebrew scriptures, throughout the Hebrew scriptures, there are two things that are going on. The first one is what goes into your mouth is as important as what comes out of it. So how one expresses the word of God is also tied deeply to food. But for me, more interesting than that is that when God needs to speak to human beings, he does so through the least likely of sources, by which I mean the least in the hierarchy of beings who have ascribed themselves as the intermediaries between God and the divine. In other words, men. He speaks through either a bush, or he speaks through a donkey, or he speaks in the Christian scriptures, particularly through women. And actually the Balaam and the donkey is female as well. So in that case, both. And that tells me that within that particular formulation of God speaking to human beings, it is of those connected to the natural cycles of the world within that rather primitive idea, who are called upon to hold the powerful to account for their actions. And just very quickly, I'll tell us the Balaam and the donkey, I'm sure you know about from the book of Leviticus, the book of Numbers. But there's a little segment where Balaam and the donkey has seen the angel of the Lord, and Balaam, the great prophet, has not. So there's an inversion. The donkey is the prophet and the Balaam is the ass. They fall to the ground before the angel of the Lord, and the following statement is made. And God opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said, "Why are you hitting me?" Because Balaam had hit her 3 times. And Balaam said, "Because you made a fool out of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." And the donkey said, "But am I not your donkey, whom you have ridden all the days of your life? Was I in the habit of treating you this way?" And Balaam said, "No." And then the story continues on. And for me, that summarizes all you need to know about what the Hebrew scriptures talks about our relationship with animals. First of all, it doesn't say God opened the mouth of the donkey and God spoke through the mouth of the donkey. It said God opened the mouth of the donkey. So we don't know whether it's God speaking or the donkey speaking, but it doesn't make any difference. The simple question that is asked is why? Why? Balaam has many opportunities to justify his human supremacy, all that he has done as the vice ruler of God's dominion. All he is as a prophet, as somebody who is in touch with the divine world. But he doesn't say that. He says what is all honesty in what should be all of our responses, which is we are terrified of being made fools of. We are terrified of losing our sense of supremacy to the animals, that everything we have constructed is based on this notion of ourselves as different and better. And the fear that might be wrong makes us feel foolish, and we lash out. And then she doesn't say too right. She doesn't say, "What an idiot you are." She doesn't do that. She asks him another question, which is essentially saying, "But I've been with you all along. You and I, we have a relationship with one another. Am I not your donkey, whom you have ridden all the days of your life?" And then she asks the golden rule. Was I in the habit of treating you this way? So the golden rule extends right there in the Hebrew scriptures from probably a very, very old folktale that was inserted into this chapter, which says we extend the golden rule to humans, to animals, to the other than human world. And Balaam has no answer for that, because there is no answer for that. We have been with you from the beginning. Have I ever treated you this way? And Balaam says no. For me, what else? I mean, what else is there to know?
Not much, Martin. Thank you. That was exquisite, extraordinary. I'm so sorry that our time has run out. Martin will be at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in August, along with a whole lot of us and a whole lot of other animal people. So do check that out. And otherwise, look into the Culture and Animals Foundation. And I'm going to be turning things over to Elaine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Welcome, everybody, to Compassion in Action. Today, we have with us a remarkable man, Fred Beasley II, also known as Dr. Goodbody, also known as Dr. G, and also known as Doc. He's a dynamic speaker, a health and wellness educator. He's a filmmaker of Raise Up, The World is Our Gem, the author of Heru, the Happy Dragon, and a feature writer in the anthology Brother Vegan. He's a creative music director and a global youth culture architect. Welcome, Doc. You are a man of many names and many talents, and we're so glad to have you with us today.
First of all, thank you for that that wonderful introduction. And I wanted to say that it's going to be hard to follow the lead of Mr. Rowe, but I will say that many of the things that he spoke about actually tie into why my book is called Heru, the Happy Dragon. And I find many of the things that he said fascinating. And we need to do a book together, good sir. But anyway, I digress.
That leads us into our first question. Can you tell us a bit about that book, Heru, the Happy Dragon? Why did you write it, and why did you choose a dragon as the hero?
Great question. So as you can see, Heru, the Happy Dragon is my first children's book. And I wrote this book because two things. One, I have 4 children, and seeing those children look for heroes outside themselves forced me to find an imaginary medium in which they could see themselves, but at the same time have empathy. The dragon becomes the main hero because in most folk tales, the dragon is fierce and considered dangerous. As an original man or so-called African-American man in the world, many times we are considered dangerous. The dragon represents the original people of the diaspora, who's a mystical character, but at the same time, many times maligned and misunderstood.
So that is a nice segue into another question that I wanted to ask you. You've been an activist for so many fronts. You've been an activist for animals, for people, for food, for fitness. What began your activism and what inspired you to become an activist? Kind of the same question.
My mother passed away when I was 5. And people asked me to look in various directions to seek her. But it was when I looked into my imagination. It's a famous quote that Einstein says that imagination is greater than knowledge. And it was in that imagination where I found my safe space. So exercise, food, all these different forms of activism are essentially forms of finding ways to activate the human being. And as a humans, what are we being? As so-called children of the Creator, I feel it is our job to create. What are we creating? It's in the fact of being that we can create the life that we seek. So many times those outside things simply become symbols that the imagination can hang a hat on. It's a famous quote by Sun Tzu. It says that Words are symbols and symbols have meaning. Where can I find a man who knows the meaning of the symbol so I can have a word with him? Essentially, that is the foundation of my book. It's a book full of symbols to spark the imagination of young people to understand that they have a potential that's unlimited.
So using words as symbols, it reminds me of the title that many of us here at Compassion Consortium are intrigued by, a title that was in some of the stuff we read about you, some of the stuff I read about you, but you call yourself a global youth culture architect. What does that, can you talk a bit about that and what it means to you?
Yes, I've had the opportunity to travel the world, and in traveling the world, I've seen the beauty of the children, and in knowing that the children, in their, some would say, innocence or naivety, have a view of the world that hasn't been hardened, or they haven't allowed a callus to grow over their imagination because of their experiences. As a global youth culture architect, it is that culture of youthfulness that unites us, because again, the children still have an unfettered imagination. So I forget the quote that says that we don't grow old. We don't grow old because we stop playing, or we don't stop playing because we grow old, but we grow old because we stop playing. That play is the imagination at work. So for me, art is an extension of that play, that playtime. And it's in putting things together. You know, when I wrote this book, my uncle told me his name is Buis Hardison. He's been around the world doing paintings. And he said, you might want to make your first book not have people as characters. Because when people see another person as a character, they place their preconceived notions or quote unquote prejudices onto the character automatically. So this is why, Martin spoke eloquently about the great scriptures using animals, and the great wisdom teaching using animals, because the animal transcends the person. And in the animal, you can see something that's outside yourself that yet connects back to yourself. And in this book, Karu the Happy Dragon, you have this dragon who, for years he served the crown. What is the crown? The crown is the dogma, the doctrine. And one day he gets the courage to go to the crown and ask, and he asked, hey, can I proceed with my journey? And they laugh at him. And what happens is he's big enough and strong enough to literally destroy the so-called crown with the swoop of his tail or the fire from his nostrils. But he does none of that. He gathers himself, he composes himself, and he calmly flies away, because he realizes at that time it's not about destroying what's outside of him. It's about reconciling his idea of who he is. And that's what leads him to lay down his sword and his shield and pick up his apron and a spatula. Because, someone told me at one time that the first supper or the last supper was really that's the first church. Mm-hmm. So food has this integral part of communion, of community. So for this dragon who for many moons has basically defended the crown, and he's gained all the trappings of material success, to lay that down and say, now I want to feed you something outside of quote unquote destruction.
Mm.
So all these things are there, and he has, once he leaves, the king sends his people to go get him. And when they come, they can't believe that they see him now in a garden, and he has a smile on his face. Why? Because again, the dragon was to be considered fierce, but he's happy in creating a world in where he doesn't have to use his powers and his restraint. If that makes sense.
Doc, I know Haru the Happy Dragon is a children's book, but you speak so eloquently and so much from the heart about it. I think it's a book that we adults could learn from as well. So one last question. If there was something today, what is the one thing that each of us today could do after the service is over to make the world a more compassionate place?
Wow. It almost brings a tear to my eye. But the same love that we profess to have for other beings and species, have that same compassion for yourself and for the people that you come in contact with.
Thank you for that. And we do forget that. I've heard that time and time again in the animal rights movement. So thank you for that wisdom, Doc. And thank you for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure, a great pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's a blessing to be here.
Well, we're blessed to have you. Sarah, back to you now.
I can attest it is an excellent book for adults because I have a copy. So Elaine, I agree with you, and thank you, Doc Beasley, for writing this book, for sharing yourself in the world with this way. I am going to ask Phil to please open chat. This is the time in our service when we offer blessings and prayers, or whatever word makes sense to you, good thoughts, whatever it is that you radiate outside from yourself, loving kindness. The world's wisdom traditions have so many beautiful practices for what we can do to offer those who are suffering or in need of healing. In addition to our hands-on work, of course, and our advocacy, that sometimes it also can feel good to do this in a spiritual or religious or philosophical way as well. And I'll cite that awesome paper I love to cite, Praying for Bush Babies Helps Them Stop Self-Harming Themselves in Captivity. Fascinating study. Maybe we'll get that back in the newsletter. So today, if Phil has the chat open, I will ask you to enter into it any names of folks who are in need of healing, any folks who have passed, folks of any species, folks who are close to you, folks you don't know. And as we do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about a Matryoshka doll. Although the origins are far from exact, it's said the first Russian nesting doll, you've seen the Russian nesting dolls, was made in 1890 by a folk craft painter. And traditionally, the outer layer is a woman, right, who's wearing a sarafan, a kind of a Russian dress. And as you open it, you go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till you get to a piece that is carved with a single piece of wood. In the first Matryoshka set that I had, the inside was a chicken, a tiny baby peep, who I loved very much. I didn't really like to nest it back in. He or she or whatever gender that little particular chick was. It's been suggested that this nesting doll or these nesting ideas was influenced by Eastern Asian culture, that it had to do with the 7 lucky god wood figures that were used in Asian cultures, and that sometimes did nest and sometimes didn't. And these are the gods that were used: the god of business success, the god of good luck, the god of prosperity, the god of relationships, love that one, the God of contentment and happiness, the God of longevity, and the God of senility prevention. My mother has dementia. I've been thinking about that one a lot lately. But regardless of where this comes from, I would like to invite you all today into a little bit of a Matrushka practice with these guys. Oh, look, it's a bear. When I was in Yosemite, I found this set of Matrushka dolls. And because Doc Beasley is here today and we were talking children's book, I thought that we would do our blessings using these Matrushka dolls. Also presencing the difficulty that is still happening with Russia and Ukraine. So as you put your blessings in here, I would like to first start by blessing bears anywhere. May they be free from harm, free from pain, free from suffering. May they be happy, joyous, and free. May all fox be free from suffering, be free from pain. May they be happy, joyous, and free. May all owl be free from pain, free from suffering. May they be happy, joyous, and free, and fabulously feathered. May all rabbit be free from pain and suffering. May they be happy, joyous, and free. And may all of these folks too. Folks, I don't know if I've got a mouse here. I don't know if I've got an otter here. I don't know quite who I've got here, or a mole. We have been trying to figure out who this little one is, but I like to think this one represents all of the other beings who I've not named. May they be free from pain, free from suffering, happy, joyous, and free. I don't think penguin because of the tail. Somebody offered penguin. I do have a thin mouse-like tail. Including in our prayers from the chat, I am including Willow and Nugget, two canine members of our community, Gail, William, Virginia, two boys who drowned in Harlem, peace to their families. Norbert Christman, DVM, Dot Christman, who left this plane in May. Someone who is suffering with COVID. Someone's husband, daughter, and son. William, Veda, all beings. A sacred send-off to a turtle. We did not take time to move further off the road because we were late for church and noticed he had not made it across on our return trip. Forgive you. Yes. Yes, we do the best we can. May that being be free from pain and suffering, happy, joyous, and free. To Gary, to Donna, to Alan, healing, please, healing. To Maximilian, to Celeste, to victims of all gun shootings, all who die from unnecessary violence, to Sweet Kitty, a member of our community's feline roommate who passed away, to all animals involved in the Kentucky Derby or any racing who lost their lives. That's a lot of pain to hold. Let's take just a deep breath. May we extend out love and kindness. And finally, in the chat, for all bears and bear mothers and bear fathers and bear parents and bear aunts and bear uncles who are in states that allow them to be shot in their dens. Bill, could you bring up our last slide? We could go on forever, couldn't we, folks? We could go on forever. So what we will do instead is we will include everyone into our final prayer and blessing. May all creatures everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, words, and actions of our lives contribute to this happiness and this freedom for all. May it be so. Amen. So mote it be. Ashe, aho, whatever ending word that you use in your tradition, or just may it be so. Thank you for joining us for Sunday service at Compassion Consortium. William has some great announcements for us. William, go for it.
So now we have some announcements. Okay, all right. So I guess our very first announcement will be the reminder that the Compassion Consortium is a co-sponsor of this very, very beautiful experiential in-person spiritual event in upstate New York, June 2, 3, and 4. So it's coming right up. It is called The Soul of Ahimsa, a vegan spirituality retreat. And the legendary nutritional biochemist T. Colin Campbell and our own Victoria Moran and Swami Chidananda are going to be talking together at this 3-day retreat at the Bhakti Marga order, which operates this fully vegan retreat center in Elmira, New York. So that's the first thing. And I think that's also been added on the chat. So, and then we have, thank you.
Oh my gosh, there I am. So I had probably better explain what the heck is going on with my face there. So our next Sunday service will be a very special format, which will include some of our normal features that you're used to and hopefully that you love, but also some new things that will celebrate the graduation of our animal chaplaincy students that you've been hearing about, who've been with us for just under 9 months right now, many of whom will be Zooming in with me from the Hudson Valley. It will not be, I sure hope it will not be as cold as it was when I took this photo and had this coat on. But we will be Zooming in from there. We'll have a special service. We will be honoring them, celebrating them as well. We hope you will be here as their community to help celebrate them. We hope we will have a large crowd to do that. And note that as we are getting through ordination and graduation and all of these things that are going on, and Victoria's wonderful retreat that we were just talking about, there will not be an engaged practice circle in June. So that is going to be our month of doing all sorts of other things. But you can always go to YouTube, go to the spiritual practices. Phil has made us a list of, I think we've got like 30 or 40 of those up now. So you can be doing these practices anytime that you want to be doing that. And if you enjoyed this service and you want to support future Compassion Consortium programming, or you'd like to become a member and experience those engaged practice circles, you can donate on our website at the link that I will get into the chat here in just a minute.